everyone, and welcome to our Grab and Go session on third-party risk management technology. Today you have me, Monica Silkart, and my colleague Christian Park, who will host the session, and we will share some perspectives on how we see existing third-party risk management technology status, and also how do we see the transformation going forward. I'm the Danish lead of Extended Enterprise team within Deloitte, and my colleague Christian, he is our global lead, and in my eyes, the ultimate expert on third-party risk management. So maybe, Christian, you want to give a couple of words on yourself and also on our Deloitte practice.
Monica, thank you very much for the introduction. So, hi everybody, nice to be with you today. My name is Christian Parker, as Monica mentioned. I'm a partner based in our London practice at Deloitte. I'm also the Global Extended Enterprise Leader, and in Deloitte speak, that essentially means Extended Enterprise we use for everything outside of an organization. So that is supplier, distributors, fourth, fifth, sixth parties. We actually use Extended Enterprise rather than third party because of that fourth, fifth party dimension. So third parties aren't the only ones you should be looking out for, as we'll cover today. Our practice covers a whole range of activities from advisory and technology implementation through to running managed services for our clients. So lovely to be with you today, and look forward to discussing more.
Thank you, Christian. So we're both very excited to talk further about the technology, of course, and third-party risk management. Before I go further into the presentation, you all can ask questions through our tab in the webinar page that you're in. And we will try to leave some time for the questions in the end and try to answer as much as we can. However, we don't know how it will go. So if you wish, please leave us your email and we will get back to you afterwards in writing if we did not manage to cover the content during the presentation or during the Q&A session. And I think here we can maybe go in further and talk about the third parties. Before we talk about technology, of course, we need to align of what do we mean when we say third parties and third-party risk management. Organizations typically have tens and sometimes even hundreds of thousands of third parties that comprise the whole extended enterprise. And we see, especially within the past few years, a significant growth in these third-party networks. And of course, the importance of managing the related risks. And we can see that organizations typically have third parties such as vendors, suppliers, license partners, distributors, and other service providers that, of course, help to contribute to the company's objectives. But also they bring in risks. So when focusing on making sure that organization can smoothly process and operate, the questions raise that do we actually know what are exactly these third-party relationships? What are these networks? Do we have the full visibility into those? How do we actually detect and manage the associated risks? And in general, what do we do about that? And basically, third-party risk management is about understanding our third-party environment and managing and mitigating the associated risks so that we can smoothly operate and achieve our organizational goals. When we talk about third-party risk management, it depends a little bit on what organizational goals are there and what do we actually want to achieve. So the process needs to be tailored to these organizational goals. However, there is still a certain life cycle that we can always recognize when we talk about third-party risk management. And in the beginning, we need to, first of all, to understand what do we work with. So we need to initiate and identify these third parties. Then we also need to do the risk assessments and decide actually where are our critical points, critical risks. Once we identify these risks, we need to go on and make sure that we have a strategy and tools to remedy these risks. And finally, after we have remedied, we also want to make sure that we have a full visibility for the whole contract period when working with these third parties. So we want to make sure that we have a capacity to monitor and also reassess the risks and, of course, then take action if something new appears. When we talk about this life cycle, technology is a critical part because irrespectively of which sector we are working with, we still see quite fragmented work with the third-party risk management, and a lot of companies either don't have a technology and tools implemented, or these tools do not speak together as such. And this is why we actually want to talk about the technology transformation today, because in the market we see a lot of new developments and a lot of capabilities that still need to be observed by our organizations globally, and of course here in the Nordics and Denmark. In Deloitte, we have been close to this process for many years, and especially Christian has been working with that for a really long time globally. And for us to be able to track the trends of how do we manage third parties, what technology is there, how the development is going, and of course to understand what is the overall view in the market, we have our global third-party risk management survey. Christian is the lead of the survey, so this is where I will give a little word for you. Christian, maybe you can introduce us and give a fly into how does the market see the technology today and what are the future trends?
Fantastic. Thanks, Monica. I'm happy to do so. So before I do so, I'll just give you a tiny bit of context on the survey that we run that Monica references there. So every year we run this, it's in its fifth year. And when it comes out later in 2021, it'll be the sixth edition. But the stats that you see in front of you are from 2020. Every year the surveys run from November through to January. We had about 1,200 respondents from across the globe, across industries. So whichever industry you're in, whichever market you're in, the statistics hopefully will be representative for your very own market. Because of the timing of the survey, it was pre-COVID, and we will touch on some of the COVID implications throughout this presentation today. But as a result, when I talk about technology, even though it is pre-COVID, it's still relevant to today. And in fact, probably more relevant as people have looked to get more real-time information around what their third parties and what their wider ecosystem is doing as the pandemic continues to impact all of us in every dimension of our lives. The technology is one component of the survey. To give you a bit of broad context, there were five other dimensions, six in total. So the first one was people were worried about was the cost of failure. So one of the things when it comes to third-party risk management is everybody's worried about if a third party fails on us, what is the cost of failure? Is that going to be a major problem for us? And when we had the survey, people were beginning to estimate that the cost of failure was quite significant now. Back when we first started the survey, most people on average were saying anywhere from a couple of $1 million to maximum $50 million. What we found is now the minimum is 50. 5 years later, 50 million, all the way up to $1 billion. And that's a whole range of consequences, whether that's brand, reputation, or otherwise. So significant impact of third-party failure. Given that the survey was pre-COVID, we talked about responsible businesses and climate change and ESG. It's a big component. We'll talk about technology, how that supports those kind of topics. I must admit, it took a bit of a pause when the pandemic first broke. People weren't so concerned about responsible business anymore as they were concerned about making sure that people were safe and sound and suppliers were being able to fulfill what they needed to fulfill in the supply chain. Linked to technology is this increased regulatory activity. So how can you use technology to satisfy regulators, regardless of which industry you're in? So FS, financial services, obviously heavily regulated, a lot of scrutiny on what the banks and insurers and other companies in the sector are doing. But whichever sector you're in, there's regulators demanding more information on outsourcing activities, more information on subcontractors, more information on security of supply chain. So technology, again, is a big theme. The vision for transformation around technology, which is what we're going to really focus in today, we'll come on to in just 1 second. The other two areas were, can we get people to help support us? So you don't need to do everything on your own. There are people out there that can help you. And then the final bit is around wider focus, which was risk is an important dimension, but what about contract management? What about performance management? What about sourcing? What about moving supply chains around, either insourcing or nearshoring? All of those dimensions were coming to play in last year's survey. And again, that has a technology implication, because you need technology to tell you and enable you to make hopefully smart decisions as it relates to your supply chain. So the key drivers for investment in TPRM activities, where do people see the biggest value? So why? This slide is all about why do third-party risk management. If I had $1 for the amount of times I get asked by chief procurement officers or head of compliance, well, look, I've been using third parties for the last 20, 30 years. Why do I need to care about them right now? Why do I need to have all this scrutiny when, frankly, we feel it was working more or less okay before? And the reality is, you look there, 47% of response is response to third-party incidents. They're on the increase. One of the stats coming from the survey is I think 9 out of 10 organizations have had a third-party incident in the last year or in the last 2 years. So these incidents are not going away. And more often than not, it's a data breach or it's a cybersecurity issue. So the need to invest, the need to focus in on technology is driven by these incidents that are impacting people's brand and reputation, impacting security and data, etc. I already mentioned regulatory requirements and scrutiny. I mentioned the responsible business component. Cost reduction is, you'll probably look at all of these drivers and say there's a healthy tension here. How can I reduce my cost? And how can I be a responsible business? And how can I respond to third-party incident? How can I meet requirements whilst reducing, again, that cost, having cost reduction on the agenda? There are ways, and we'll touch upon that as we go through. We'll pause as we go through and take questions along the way, but this is the key investment drivers. Back to you, Monica.
Yeah, thank you, Christian. I can definitely see very similar trends in Denmark, even though we were not part of this global survey in the full scale as we wanted in 2020. But the year 2020 was actually a very big one also for Denmark, where besides COVID as such, as a very disruptive event, we also had a couple of big data breach incidents, as you say. You know, like one of those, probably the most famous one, was the ISS hacker attack, which of course put a lot of focus towards, you know, like data security and how do we manage our third parties, because that was a very, very significant event. So these drivers, I also do recognize those here in Denmark when we speak with our network. Another interesting thing from the survey, it seems that the respondents, they were generally not happy with the technology that they are using. I know that I can definitely see that trend when I'm speaking with both our clients and people in the network who are working with third-party relationships. What do you think, maybe you have a comment on that, and what do you think is the reason for such unhappiness as such?
Thanks for the question. I think it's a great question, because most organizations are really struggling to really get a sensible view on this topic. Typically, most people are using either an ERP system, such as a legacy ERP system, to try and do third-party risk management within a system that frankly may not be configured or designed to do it. So as a result, people are struggling to get the information, people are struggling to get the assessments done in the right way that they want to do them. The other thing really is most organizations' data integrity, I think, is questionable. And you'll see that 32% of our respondents of the survey say the data integrity is questionable. And I think we talk about the single source of truth, which is utopia. It would be great if every organization had a single source of truth as it relates to who they do business with, whether it's suppliers, distributors, agents, fourth, fifth parties. It would be great if there was one single position or one register that you could go to determine who was doing business with whom. The reality is it's very disparate. You might have suppliers in one location, but all the other third-party types might be all over the organization. The other thing is, and COVID is a good example of this, where when the pandemic first broke, many organizations were like, okay, well, tell me where our suppliers are and tell me which ones are going to be impacted by the next wave of the pandemic. And if you didn't have the reporting capability and if you didn't have the management information readily available, uh, people were spending months collecting this information. And those that did have the information were obviously in a good position. But what I would say is today, when we look at the respondents of the survey, as well as the conversations we have with our clients in the marketplace, I would say I can count on my two hands the number of organizations that have solved the technology issues adequately. I wouldn't say anybody's got this perfect just yet, but adequately. And then finally, one of the biggest challenges many of our clients have is what's the way forward here? How do we look at, what technology should we use? Which one's going to be robust enough for the size of our organization? Or I don't want to have a sledgehammer, as we say, to crack a nut. I don't want the most expensive tech to just do, I've only got 50 third parties, what do I use? So those are the types of things that people are struggling with, and hopefully we can address in the next couple of slides.
Yes, thank you, Christian. Definitely. It's also something that I think companies in Denmark can relate to. Some sectors, of course, they are maybe a little bit more prepared for managing the third parties and having the visibility. As we know, historically, financial sector or pharmaceutical sector, they have always been subject to very strict regulatory requirements, so they had maybe a little bit better processes and controls implemented. But I know that for many organizations, actually, this year, what especially happened with COVID, it was a big hit and a big eye-opener to realize that they actually do have quite big gap both in resources and also in technology of basically managing the third parties, and first of all understanding even of what do they deal with. So I think this observation that you made is very relevant. That the question is there, of course. So what is the way forward? And just to recap also a little bit, and maybe to look into what we have today, I really admired the survey results that gave us a little bit of an example of how do companies actually solve the problems today. And it seems that we have this tiered approach. As you mentioned, there is no single truth, and I don't know if it can still be, but it seems that there are a lot of other solutions already available in the market. And I know that it's both relevant for Denmark, but also our global respondents answered, as you mentioned, that they try to kind of like stitch in different type of solutions to make it best work for them. And first of all, having as a base their underlying ERP systems such as SAP, Ariba, or Oracle, or similar. And then there is, of course, a quite broad selection of specific platforms for third-party risk management. We know quite well the Arava platform, the Core Stream, Hyperos, and so on. And then, of course, there is even bigger pool for choice of the small risk domain-specific solutions that can help basically to provide the data feeds into the bigger platforms. So there is a possibility, of course, to work with that. And I know that maybe globally, especially in some regions, there is expertise is a little bit longer going, and there is a little bit more experience with that. In Denmark, at least I can speak mostly about Denmark, we are still growing and trying to find out what solutions are the best. But that said, I'm actually quite curious. So you mentioned that, like it's very interesting to see what is the way forward. And you work with the global companies. You have also the global alliances that you speak probably on the daily basis. So what do you see is actually the way forward? Maybe you can give us a little bit fly into what perspectives do you have on this technology question?
It's a great question. Again, thanks, Monica. I think there's two schools of thought, frankly, at the moment around technology. The larger organizations, perhaps unsurprisingly, find themselves in a position where they're being driven down an IT roadmap that requires, I guess, a consolidation of assets. So an IT department would typically want people to congregate around one or two key assets and drive and drive that forward on that basis, which is understandable, but sometimes that the main asset that they have might not be fit for purpose. So it causes a challenge in the third-party risk space. So in the instance where that is, we're beginning to see very much what you see on this page here. So you have a tier one, your ERP backbone. Your tier two is something that might be either a procurement platform with very strong third-party risk capabilities, or it would be a GRC solution with very strong third-party risk capabilities. So that is the need for a repository to retain the information, to store assessment results, to store if you have screening and monitoring going on of media, of social media, of internet, to store that information is critical. So yeah, I don't think we see any organization of any significant size, and by that I mean over maybe 250 third parties that they're interacting with, get away with not having a technology in place to do that. And then the third tier that you see there, which is the data feeds, that is very much the future. So traditionally, Monica, you articulated this at the beginning of the webinar, which is typically you have an assessment process where you would issue questionnaires out to a third party, you would get their information back, you would probably score and assess that information and then give them a risk rating. And you would do that across multiple risk areas. So it could be financial crime, information security, labor rights, and so on. What we found is there's a real desire by most organizations to navigate away from that process of questionnaires. Do I believe that we're going to get there anytime soon? Probably not, but the desire is there. So people don't want to be sending out on an annual basis, let's say, questionnaires that are perhaps static for a year and don't give them any real-time assurance or comfort. So that tier three on this diagram is becoming increasingly important about what data sets, what information exists out there in the marketplace that we can leverage, that is updated on a regular basis, e.g. daily, that will give us some credible intelligence as to what's happening in our supply chain so that we can make more real, more meaningful decisions around who we're interacting with and what we want them to do. So that tier three is really the future, but you still need the tier two in order to receive the tier three information. The worst is you could have, in my opinion anyway, the worst outcome is that you have each of those risk areas I mentioned operating in silos, each doing their own thing with their own separate technology, with their own data feed, and it's not being aggregated at the center for management use to understand where does the aggregate risk in the supply chain exist. Notwithstanding, of course, that you need to understand by individual supplier or third party where that risk sits. You still need to have that aggregate view, and that's why that tier two is ever as important as it ever was. But tier three is clearly where we see the future, and this real-time intelligence. I think we're probably 2 to 3 years out from getting to a position where we have real-time actionable intelligence that's credible, because the credible piece is the important thing. There's lots of people saying lots of things about lots of people. That's that, but we need it to be more or less the truth.
Yeah, that's true. That's a brilliant comment. Thanks, Christian. So clearly there is a lot to choose from, and I'm just thinking, so we still, especially in the Nordics and in Denmark, I know that a lot of companies are only starting to look into how do they manage their third parties. A lot of companies have some work done, but it typically is quite decentralized. I know that quite many companies still do that on a very manual base, like using the emails or Excel. Nothing bad about Excel, but maybe that's not the purpose. And my question would be, do we have any best practice advice for those who are only starting to work with their third-party risk management, who now actually want to focus on it and want to implement maybe, or like adopt and implement some good solutions that are available in the market? So do you have like some best practice advice of where to start and what road we could take?
Yeah, another good question. I think the first thing to realize, this is a road well traveled at this point in time. Maybe not necessarily in And I actually do think there's quite a lot of good things happening in the Nordics region, by the way. But it's well traveled around the globe. So from in every country that we've had the pleasure of visiting, and that includes pretty much every region and many countries, somebody somewhere is doing something really smart and interesting around third-party risk management. So this is not a I need to invent the wheel. I need to figure this out on my own. There's plenty of support and resources out there. Perhaps too many options out there in terms of technology platforms, in terms of data feeds, etc. So clearly, I would say this, but there's an opportunity just to talk to your friendly Deloitte consultant who will at least give you an overview. But notwithstanding that, I guess you have two options if you're starting out. One is in your existing suite of technology assets, is there something that is already credible in the marketplace? And I would point you to, if you don't want to talk to us, you can look at a Gartner report around third-party risk technology solutions. They've done an assessment, and what you can do is obviously look at what you have in your technology stack and look at the report and see if there's something that's coming out high or not at this point in time. If there's nothing there, then I think there's two options. One is you would buy and implement a solution that, again, various complexities and price scales in there, but buy and implement a solution that would allow you to run a process, score people appropriately, hopefully comes with some out-of-the-box questionnaires that you might want to use, and comes with integrations with data feeds. And again, you could do that either on premise or in cloud. Obviously, cloud is the favorite solution nowadays. The third option is don't necessarily buy technology, but look for a partner who can work with you and operate it for you and comes with a technology platform. We and plenty of others offer an all-inclusive package, right? That basically comes with technology and says, well, give us the supplier names and we'll do all the assessments for you. Obviously, you need to understand what we're doing and accept the risk, but there's an option there, and there's plenty of providers out there that are willing to do that for you as well. So I would like to say, whereas maybe 5 years ago it might have taken somebody maybe 2 to 3 years to get up and running in this space in an adequate way, I think nowadays you're talking about literally a couple of months to get something up and running. If you want something super tailored for your organization and your risk appetite, then of course you're talking much longer. You're probably talking a year or so. But yeah, there's plenty of options out there that can get you moving pretty quickly.
Well, thank you. I guess that is good news for all of us. In December, we had another webinar within a certain industry. And I know that one of the questions, we had like also an interactive survey where we asked people participating who were on CPO, CEO level to actually answer if they have had any disruptive events and if they know how they manage the third parties. And at least at that time, we found out that there were a lot of people who answered, I don't know, which afterwards led to the discussion that very often there is still a need for further focus and to actually increasing with the visibility within the companies, which was a very interesting finding for us. And I guess we can relate to that. So I think going back to your comment that nowadays it doesn't take years to actually do the transformation, I think it is a very, very good news for the companies who, and also for the executives who only now start to turn their heads into the third parties and third party risk management. So I think we really need to strengthen the dialogue around that area and actually see how next year survey results will show the transformation and the maturity levels of all the companies also in Denmark. Great. So thanks a lot, Christian, for great answers. But we also talked about that we should show some demos of how the third-party risk management technology looks. So maybe I will give also word to you. And I know that you had some good words around the existing technology that we have been working with. If you could start introducing it.
Yeah, of course. So I mentioned tier 3 on the prior slide around data feeds, etc. And really this desire and frankly trend that's gathering quite a lot of pace around moving away from questionnaires to credible, actionable intelligence, right? And what we really want to do is support our clients and the industry. And I know clients talk to each other. They're all looking at how do we get to a place where we are sharing information perhaps amongst ourselves, or at least using information from data feeds that allow us to make real-time decisions. And so the art of the possible, which is the components that you see here, is it's just a high-level view of the direction of travel. It gets quite in depth quite quickly, and literally we could spend 6 hours on probably each and every single one of the topics here. So I'm going to do my best to go through them in a couple of minutes. But the risk sensing component is using AI, natural language processing powered risk sensing engines. So one of the things that people always ask us, is there a capability out there that will give me, allow me to track published media, social media, and the deep web for information about the people that I'm using and perhaps the people that they're using? And we say, yes, of course, there's plenty out there. And they're on a spectrum. So perhaps the least refined ones literally just do a fancy Google search for the supplier name and produce lots of information and lots of hits. Now that in itself is not particularly useful, because you're going to get a lot of false positives, you're going to get a lot of information coming back. And also a Google search is not particularly intelligent. It's just you looking for keywords and the like. On the other end of the spectrum, we have providers that have they're able to filter all of their searches by what I would call event types. So let's say you're particularly worried about cybersecurity events. You're able to create search strings and sentences that describe the event that you're most worried about. That event that gets taken by the search engine using natural language processing to look for similar event types. It does it in not only in English, but obviously in as many languages as you need it to do it in. And then what it does is it uses artificial intelligence to reduce the number of false positives down automatically. So what we find the best providers is that from one end of the spectrum, it's raw data. To the other end of the spectrum, it's been curated, it's been analyzed, it's been looked at, and it's been QA'd such that you're in a position where you have alerts that are coming through that are relevant, are interesting, and prioritized for what you're particularly interested to hear about as what's happening in your supply chain. And so you can go from literally hundreds of thousands of alerts on one end of the spectrum to maybe 2 or 3 a day on the other end of the spectrum. So that risk sensing is really important. You then chuck into that the data feeds that we talked about. So you have plenty of external providers that provide data feeds, apply the same lens and methodology to that, and you've got really what we believe is the beginnings of truly actionable intelligence that by hearing what's happening on the ground. So I'll give you an example of one of our clients during the pandemic, very concerned about logistics and movement of goods between suppliers and warehouses and manufacturing locations. When they asked the supplier directly through a questionnaire, everything was wonderful. Don't worry, everything's under control. But when you use risk sensing and you begin to get sentiment on the streets as to what's happening, you get a very different story. So there are blockades happening, there are people not turning up for work, packages aren't being delivered, et cetera, et cetera. So it's using the risk sensing information to validate the intelligence that you're getting direct is really important. The monitoring and alerting piece is linked. The only thing I would add here is that more and more often we're beginning to see people using what we call, again, the deep web and what's called digital exhaust of information between suppliers or third parties and their suppliers and third parties and so on down the train. So the 4th, 5th, 6th parties that I mentioned at the beginning of the conversation, being able to map that out gives you a bit more certainty as to who they're using. So typically with the way people look at subcontractors and 4th, 5th parties is they go, give me, they'll reach out to the supplier or the third party and ask them, who are you using? And they're relying on that information. This is an alternative mechanism to validate that information. From the 2 supplier collaboration and assessment engines, this is about questionnaires, a bit more traditional, but applying AI to the responses. So today, most organizations get the responses in and somebody has to read the responses, provide a judgment, etc. We're beginning to use AI and robotics to do that in a more automated manner, and then just relying on our QA processes to look at that. And I think that's again, that's the future. The final bit, reporting and analytics. None of this is any good if you can't pull the information and go to the board with actionable intelligence and meaningful intelligence. So the reporting analytics should never be overlooked. And the financial risk analysis is really it's a difficult area. Many people want to know how financially viable are my third parties, and people, as alluded to on this slide, rely on a Dun & Bradstreet or a credit rating agency that may or may not be up to date. It might be 12 months old, it might be 18 months old. And so getting that real-time information is again linked to the data feeds and the risk sensing. We've called it out specifically because it's an important area for some. That's really an area of focus for some of our clients and what we see. So imagine, let yourself sit back and imagine that you could have this at your fingertips on a dashboard, that you have all this information, it's triaged and it's meaningful, and you can make actionable decisions based on what's happening in your supply chain. That's where we're seeing the future, and that's where we think we'll be in about a year or two from now. Well, I said, I know what we're going to do now is try and show you a glimpse of that as we have in the Deloitte world, our own tools and tech that we built. Given time, I know we don't have that much time, but for those of you who would be interested in a deeper dive in the future, then I'm sure you're well aware that you're more than welcome to just have a chat, and we'll pull that up. So the first one we're going to show you is something called what we call TrueView, and the here we go. The technology demos are always fraught with complications, but what you have here is an example of what our professionals use when we run this for our clients, but also our clients are able to log in. The idea being that you can have dashboards, you can have the questionnaires, you can have data feeds, etc. So yeah, and you can just see there exactly. And of course, the remediation on the bottom there that was quickly flashed up is about, okay, so what? We've got all these issues or things that have come up. What are we going to do about it? And you have that option from a remediation point of view. Monica, if we can go to the next tab in your web browser there. This is an example of a dashboard. He says, hoping that, I know this, one of the things you do obviously in preparation for demos is that you log in and you hope that you don't get timed out, but guess what, you do. If we go back to, maybe we just click on, if you click on the, if you go back up.
Yes.
And you go to that dashboard reporting. Let's see if that works that way. There you go. So this is an example, dummy data of what you can, the potential dashboards you can create as it relates to. So this is what this is trying to do for an organization. It says, okay, well, how many of my third parties should I be worried about? Well, how many of them have a critical or high risk rating? And that's, as you can see here, it's 31% of our population has a critical or high risk rating. That's probably not true for many organizations. It's probably more in the 15 to maybe 10 to 15% range. But for the purpose of this demo, we're obviously dealing with a very risky supply chain. So we've got about 32% of our supply chain coming up as critical. If you can see where are the third parties, you can see that you've got a little Google map there. You can see of all the third parties that we have, how many critical, high, medium, low, or very low. Every organization is different, as I'm sure we're all aware. So that population, that triage would be different. And then what we have here is just an example of who the third parties are. As you can see off to the right, you can filter it. Everything is filterable, and you can triage the data as much as you want. All of these dashboards are configurable. So again, the art of the possible in terms of, as long as the data is there, you can triage it any which way. If I ask you to quickly go into the exec summary tab, which is, there we go, yeah, perfect. You'll see here is that you got, in this case, 41 third parties, which services, how many have been deactivated, what about SLA status? So this is really around performance management. I think that's a really neat way of just having a look at who's in breach, who's not, what are we doing about it, etc. And then if I ask you to click on the operational component there, the operational component is really what's happening from a pure ops perspective. How many third-party assessments have been done? How many have been screened? How many are we monitoring, etc., etc. If you go to the third tab on your web browser, Monica, I know maybe it's timed out. Okay, so we can go back to the second tab. And we can click on the risk dashboard. And if we click on that home deposit, and bear in mind this is dummy data, if we go all the way down that list to the bottom, and we go proceed to the risk profile, what you can begin to see is, okay, so what's going on? What's driving that rating? So you can see here we've got Home Depot, we've got relationship owner, we've got the service category, we've got data feeds here. So BitSight is an information security rating. You've got Dun & Bradstreet, and then you've got an overall risk score, and then you've got the overall status, which is not approved. Then what you'll see underneath in that detail, you've got cognitive risk sensing. So these are the alerts. So we got some financial alerts, we got some geopolitical alerts, we got some information security alerts. We've got a lot of alerts on this third party. What you can do is you can see here the first one is insolvency, bankruptcy history. The third party is declared Chapter 11 bankruptcy. Not a great alert. Clearly, it's critical, and the approval status is in this client has been put to no-go. So if that's flagged, we're not going to use them. Clearly. You wouldn't want to in that position. But look, you can see there are other geopolitical risks. There are approved with conditions. There's straightforward goes. Again, all of this is tailorable to you as an organization. If you've got a third-party questionnaire along there, you can see the questionnaires that have been responded to. So there's environmental. This is based on what they've filled in. So what are they? We've asked them a question. They come back with an answer, and we've put in a mitigation, and that can be either auto-generated or it can be done by people. And if you go to assessment, you can see which assessments have been done, and then monitoring is more of the same. So that's just an overview of what is available at a very high level. There are many, many tools out there. This is our tool. It's not the best tool in the world. But it is a tool that works really well. What I would suggest is that you talk to us. We have an inventory of all of the tools out there that are in the marketplace, and we've done an assessment of all of them. So I'm happy to share that with you. The next thing I want to just quickly touch on, because again, conscious of time, is we were asked as part of the COVID, if you go to the last tab you have there, the next one along, how can you help me? And this was for many of our clients at the time. Can you help me, show me on a satellite imagery basis where all my suppliers are? So if you click to areas on this one, and you go to supply chain, what happens here is in this demo, we've used cities as a proxy for suppliers. So we've used cities or locations as a proxy for suppliers. You can see this is what a supply chain could look like. And frankly, it's probably a simpler version of many of our clients' supply chains. So you have suppliers all over the world, lots going on. What we did for this client, or many of our clients actually, is we put in COVID information because they were really interested in understanding what was happening as it related to COVID. So if you go to the layers tab, Monica, and just choose the confirmed cases count, what that did is show, you can see that it starts off well, it finishes in December 2020, but it shows the status of COVID around the world as of December. But what we were able to start doing is begin modeling what's happening from a COVID perspective around the world. So we could put in, frankly, the expected cases, what was happening, how that was going to impact supply chain, etc. For those of you who are interested, again, we can show you how this works in real time. But for the purposes of this demo and time, I won't go into it. If we click that layer off, if I may, go back to the top there, Yeah, and just click back on it. Great. And then what I'm going to do is, remember I mentioned screening and monitoring. Remember I mentioned getting real-time data by third party. If I then ask Monica to focus in on Manchester as a city in the UK, this is testing both of our geographical knowledge. Even though I live in the UK, I always, for some odd reason, struggle to identify where Manchester is. But yeah, if you click on, say, the 3, yeah, well, you've got it there. So it's, if you, there we go, it's in the middle.
My geography.
Yeah, that's perfect. If you see Wolverhampton, we go 2 circles up. There we go. Keep on, yeah, go. There we go. See Warrington?
Yes.
And that circle there, and that is, I believe, Manchester. Perfect.
Yes.
If you click on results, what we were able to do here is model, again, the COVID cases that were happening in Manchester. It's not a pretty picture, but if you just scroll down, Monica, you can see the way the kind of curve has been in Manchester as it relates to COVID. But then if you go to details, what we've done is this data would be pulled from a single source of truth, the procurement system and ERP system. So you would pull this information from there. And then if you go to the last tab on the right, which is slightly hidden on my screen, but beside country monitors, the next one along, alerts, yes. This is where you could put those screening and monitoring alerts that we saw in the previous platform, but link them in, so financial solvency, business continuity, etc. And you can resolve everything in here if that's what you wanted to do, rather than in the other platform. The two get interlinked very nicely, and frankly, there are platforms out there that have this all integrated. We have them on 2 linked platforms, but again, from a single sign-on perspective, it makes it relatively seamless. So there's some visualization components here, and there's some data components that I just wanted to highlight to you. I think we'll pause there in terms of demo, but we're doing plenty at the moment. The number one thing we're being asked to do is show the art of the possible with a whole bunch of different technology solutions. And this is just a quick overview. Hopefully it's given you a flavor as to what's available. Monica, thank you very much for helping with that
Yes,
demo.
of course. Thank you, Christian, for the introduction and also the little demo and explanation of what can be possible to be done. And I think, being conscious of time, it's time to wrap up. So Christian, thank you so much for a lot of good insights and information about our technology transformation. And I think it's just important to say that it doesn't matter whether the organization is big or small, and it doesn't matter which sector the company is operating. I think especially this year has shown that it's very important to manage the third-party risks. And technology is an inevitable part of actually doing it right and doing it efficiently. So with that, I think based on our today's talk, we know that there is a lot to choose, and there is still a lot of tools and solutions are being developed. So keep tuned and make sure to follow up. Also, we are happy to provide further perspective from our side if you want more information. Christian, do you have anything to add to this note?
Other than thank you for your time, and I wish you all the best in your third-party risk transformation activities.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.